Hey guys, tonight we're going to embark on a rather peculiar journey, one draped in the softest, most luxurious fabric known to the ancient world, silk. Imagine, if you will, the gentle rustle of fabric as you recline on a divan, perhaps a warm breeze drifting through an open marble archway, carrying the faint scent of exotic spices. You're not just listening, you're there, in the heart of ancient Rome. But a Rome unlike any you've ever pictured. This isn't the Rome of stern senators or valiant gladiators. No. This is the Rome of an emperor who had a rather singular obsession. An emperor who, according to the whispers of history, insisted on wearing nothing but silk. Yes, from dawn till dusk. Every single thread touching his imperial skin was spun by a silkworm from the distant east. It sounds comfortable, doesn't it? Almost dreamlike, but I assure you, living in the court of this particular emperor, with his idiosyncrasies, well, you probably wouldn't survive a day. The social etiquette alone would be enough to send you scurrying for a quiet corner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel, and it tells me you appreciate these little forays into the forgotten corners of history. And if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment with your location and the local time. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off to. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're stepping back to the 3rd century AD, to a time when the Roman Empire, for all its immense power and vast territories, found itself under the rather delicate, yet firm, silken grip of a young man named Elagabalus. He was an emperor unlike any other, known more for his lavish parties, bizarre religious practices, and, of course, his unparalleled devotion to the softest, most shimmering of fabrics. You see him now, perhaps, lounging on a couch, his tunic a cascade of shimmering white silk, so fine it seems to barely touch his skin. The air around him is heavy with perfumes, and the clinking of delicate glassware barely interrupts the hushed whispers of his courtiers. This wasn't just a fashion choice for Elagabalus, it was a way of life, a constant, tactile affirmation of his unique, and often baffling, position at the very pinnacle of the known world. His insistence on silk was so profound, so all-encompassing, that it became one of the defining characteristics of his brief but unforgettable reign. Imagine the sheer logistics of it all, every tunic, every drape, every pillowcase, all made of silk. It makes you wonder how much silk a single emperor could possibly wear through in a day, let alone a year, and where on earth did it all come from that? My friends, is a story for another gentle chapter. You can almost feel the smooth, cool fabric against your own skin, can't you? A sensation designed for ultimate comfort, for profound relaxation, lulling you deeper into the quiet hum of history, to understand Elagabalus's silken obsession. We first need to understand the incredible journey silk made to reach Roman hands. You see, silk wasn't native to the Roman Empire, not by a long shot. It came from lands so far east, so mysterious, that Romans often spoke of them in hushed, almost mythical tones. We're talking about China, a place known to the Romans as Serica, the land of silk, imagine, if you will. The vast distances involved, from the mulberry groves where silkworms munched on leaves, across scorching deserts, over towering mountain passes, and through the bustling markets of Central Asia. Then eventually, by sea or land, into the heart of the Roman world. This was the famous Silk Road, not a single paved highway as we might imagine today, but a sprawling network of trade routes, arteries of commerce stretching for thousands of miles. Now, picture yourself as a merchant on one of these routes. You're trudging through the seemingly endless sands of the Taklamakan Desert. The sun beating down, your camel caravan swaying gently, laden with precious bales of raw silk. The air is dry, the silence vast, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the soft padding of camel hooves. It was a perilous journey, filled with dangers both natural and man-made. Bandits lurked in mountain passes, ready to ambush unsuspecting traders. Sandstorms could appear out of nowhere, swallowing entire caravans in a swirling vortex of grit and despair. And then there were the logistics finding water, bartering for food, navigating through territories controlled by countless different tribes and empires. It was an epic undertaking, a testament to human ingenuity and the insatiable desire for luxury goods. But the silk itself wasn't just raw material. It often changed hands multiple times along the way. Chinese merchants would sell it to Central Asian intermediaries, who would then pass it on to Parthian or Persian traders, and so on, until it finally reached the Roman provinces of Syria or Egypt. Each exchange added to its cost. Each journey added to its mystique. The secrecy surrounding silk production in China was fiercely guarded. For centuries, the Romans had no idea how silk was actually made. They knew it came from worms, but the specifics were a profound mystery. Some Romans even believed it was harvested from trees. Historians still argue whether the Chinese truly managed to keep their secrets completely for so long, or if the sheer distance and complexity of the trade simply made the details too difficult to discern. Either way, it only added to the allure. Think about it. By the time a shimmering bolt of silk arrived in Rome, it had absorbed the dust of countless landscapes, the whispers of dozens of languages, and the sweat of untold numbers of traders. It was more than just fabric. It was a condensed history of 1,000 miles, a tangible connection to a world almost entirely unknown to the average Roman citizen. This long, arduous journey, coupled with the secret of its creation, made silk incredibly rare and consequently incredibly valuable. It was the ultimate status symbol, the kind of luxury that only the wealthiest and most powerful individuals could even dream of possessing. And our friend Elagabalus, as you'll soon hear, had dreams that were grander and more silken than perhaps any Roman before him. The very thought of such an extravagant textile, so far from its origins, floating effortlessly through the Roman air, is enough to send one gently into slumber. Given the epic journey and the secrecy surrounding its creation, it's no surprise that silk arrived in Rome as the most expensive commodity imaginable. Imagine trying to buy a single bolt of this shimmering fabric. You wouldn't just need a handful of coins, you'd need a small fortune. We're talking about prices that could rival the cost of a small villa, or even a legionnaire's annual salary. For just a few yards of the finest material, it was, in essence, the ancient world's equivalent of haute couture. But with a price tag that would make even today's luxury brands blush. To put it in perspective, sources from the time suggest that silk could be worth its weight in gold, or even more. Think about that for a moment, literally trading gold for fabric. It sounds almost comical to our modern ears, accustomed as we are to fast fashion and readily available textiles. But in ancient Rome, possessing silk wasn't just about looking good. It was a loud, undeniable declaration of your wealth, your power, and your place at the very apex of society. If you were draped in silk, everyone knew you were someone of immense importance, someone who could afford to literally wear their riches. This extreme cost also meant that silk was rarely, if ever, seen on the average Roman citizen. You certainly wouldn't find a farmer or a baker sporting a silk tunic. It was reserved exclusively for the elite emperors, senators, the wealthiest patrician families, and, of course, the most successful courtesans who wished to flaunt their status. Even within these privileged circles, it was often used sparingly, perhaps as a trim on a toga or a delicate shawl, not as an entire garment. Historians still argue whether the Romans imported more raw silk to weave themselves or preferred pre-made garments. But either way, the supply was limited, and the demand was insatiable. This scarcity only drove the prices higher, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of exclusivity. Consider the social impact. If you wore silk, you weren't just warm, you were advertising your immense economic power to anyone who saw you. It was a visual shorthand for "I have arrived," and "I have arrived in style." Imagine walking into a Roman banquet, the soft lamplight catching the subtle sheen of your silk toga, drawing every eye. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about command. The very rustle of the fabric would announce your presence, a whisper of untold riches. And for an emperor like Elagabalus, whose entire reign seemed to be a performance of imperial grandeur and indulgence, silk became his signature. He didn't just wear it, he practically bathed in it, turning the most expensive fabric in the world into his everyday attire. A personal uniform of unparalleled extravagance. It was a bizarre flex, if you will, a deliberate, almost childlike refusal to acknowledge the economic realities that governed the lives of his subjects. His utter disregard for the astronomical cost of silk was just one more way he demonstrated his perceived divine right to do as he pleased, a trait that would both define and ultimately doom his brief reign. Before we dive deeper into Elagabalus's silken escapades, let's gently rewind and understand who this extraordinary, rather puzzling young man actually was. His story begins far from the grandeur of Rome, in a bustling Syrian city called Emesa, modern-day Homs. He wasn't born into Roman aristocracy in the traditional sense, but into a powerful and influential priestly family. His original name was Varius Avitus Bassianus, and from a very young age, he was the chief priest of the sun god Elagabal. This wasn't just any deity. Elagabal was a prominent, ancient god, revered with a striking black conical stone at the heart of his temple. This early life as a high priest, steeped in exotic rituals and deeply spiritual practices, would profoundly shape his future rule in Rome. Now, how did a Syrian priest boy end up as the emperor of Rome? It's a tale woven with ambition, family machinations, and a touch of Roman legionary loyalty. His grandmother, Julia Maesa, and his mother, Julia Suemius, were formidable women, part of the powerful Severan dynasty that had recently lost its emperor. Caracalla, sensing an opportunity to regain power. These two astute women orchestrated a masterful political maneuver. They spread rumors, hints, and outright fabrications that young Bassianus was, in fact, the illegitimate son of the beloved former Emperor Caracalla. It was a brilliant, if utterly audacious, claim. Designed to appeal to the legions who still held a deep affection for Caracalla. Imagine the scene: a young boy, barely 14 years old, presented to the Roman legions stationed in Syria, his powerful female relatives, whispering tales of his supposed imperial lineage, promising bonuses and stability. The legions, perhaps weary of political instability and eager for a charismatic leader, fell for it in 218 AD. They proclaimed him emperor. It was a swift, almost unbelievable ascent from the temple precincts of Emesa to the ultimate position of power in the Roman world. He promptly adopted the name Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, but he quickly became known by the name of his god, Elagabalus, a testament to how deeply intertwined his priestly identity was with his new imperial role. His age, or rather, his youth, is a crucial detail here. He was still very much a teenager, suddenly thrust into a world of immense power and expectation, far from the structured, religious environment he had always known. This sudden leap into absolute authority, combined with his deeply ingrained religious beliefs and the influence of his strong-willed female relatives, set the stage for a reign that would be nothing short of revolutionary, bewildering, and ultimately, tragically short. Historians still argue whether his wild behavior was calculated provocation or simply the naive indulgence of a sheltered, powerful teenager. Regardless, his arrival in Rome marked the beginning of a truly unique chapter in imperial history. A chapter that would feature an unprecedented amount of silk. Among other eccentricities, You can almost feel the desert wind that carried him from his humble priestly duties to the glittering, bewildering throne of the Roman Empire, a gentle breeze that now carries you deeper into slumber, with the vast power of the Roman Empire suddenly at his fingertips. The young Elagabalus wasted no time in indulging his wildest desires, and few desires were wilder or more evident than his love for silk. This wasn't just about wearing a nice tunic, it was an act of deliberate, almost performative decadence. He took the most expensive fabric in the world and treated it like everyday wear. A flamboyant statement designed to shock and awe the conservative Roman elite. Imagine the scene in the imperial palace. You, a humble courtier, might be accustomed to seeing senators in their wool togas, perhaps with a subtle stripe of purple. Then Elagabalus breezes in, shimmering from head to toe in pure, unadulterated silk. Not just his tunics. Mind you, accounts, albeit often exaggerated by hostile Roman historians, describe him using silk for practically everything: curtains, bed linens, even fishing nets. Yes, you heard that right, silk fishing nets. The sheer absurdity of it was, perhaps, part of the point. He wasn't just emperor, he was a living, breathing testament to boundless luxury. His parties were legendary for their opulence, and silk was always a star attendee. Guests would reportedly recline on silk cushions, dine from tables draped in silk cloths, and watch performances where dancers swirled in diaphanous silk robes. It was a sensory overload, designed to overwhelm and impress. Think of it as the ultimate flex of imperial power and wealth, a way to show that the rules of economy and scarcity simply didn't apply to him. One might even describe it as the ancient world's most extravagant interior design project, where the budget was, quite literally, infinite. This lavish display wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a deliberate breaking of Roman norms. Traditional Roman values emphasized austerity, duty, and military prowess. Flamboyant displays of personal luxury, especially by an emperor, were often frowned upon, seen as a sign of weakness, or worse. Oriental decadence. Elagabalus, with his Syrian background and his devotion to an Eastern sun god, seemed to revel in defying these conventions. His silk obsession, therefore, became a symbol of his entire controversial reign, an embrace of foreign luxury, a rejection of traditional Roman virtues, and an almost childlike delight in pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. Historians still argue whether his extravagance was a calculated political move to alienate the old guard, or simply the unchecked indulgence of a powerful, sheltered teenager, regardless of his motivations. Elagabalus's reign was characterized by a level of excess that Rome had rarely, if ever, seen, and at the heart of it all, draped over every surface and adorning every person of importance, was that impossibly soft, impossibly expensive fabric. You can almost feel the gentle swish of silk against your own skin as you drift deeper into the peculiar history of this unforgettable emperor. The air itself seems to shimmer with the ghost of 1,000 silken threads, a gentle lullaby for your journey into dreams. While Elagabalus certainly took silk obsession to an unprecedented level, it's important to remember that silk had a place in Roman society long before he arrived. It wasn't entirely new to them, rather. His use of it was simply more for centuries. It had been a highly coveted import, a symbol of extreme wealth and exotic taste. But it was generally used with a certain discretion, a quiet nod to one's elevated status rather than a flamboyant scream. You'd find silk in the wardrobes of the very richest Roman matrons, perhaps as a delicate veil or a finely embroidered scarf. Imagine a wealthy lady attending a public event, her toga of rich wool, but peeking out from beneath, or draped artfully over her arm. A flash of shimmering silk in a vibrant hue. It was a subtle flex, a whisper of luxury, not the full-throated roar that Elagabalus would later unleash. Sometimes it was even used in mosaics, with tiny fragments of silk woven into the intricate designs to give them a lifelike sheen, a testament to its value and the Romans' appreciation for its unique properties. Men, generally, were more conservative in their dress. A senator wouldn't be caught dead in a full silk toga. That would have been seen as effeminate and un-Roman. However, they might incorporate silk discreetly, perhaps as a lining in a cloak for warmth and comfort, or as a detail on a formal garment worn only within the privacy of their homes. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? We didn't talk about well. Silk was far more appealing than that, but still a deeply exotic import. The perception of silk was also complex. While admired for its beauty and comfort, it was also sometimes associated with extravagance and foreign decadence. Roman moralists, ever keen to point out the decline of traditional virtues, often lamented the influx of such luxuries from the East. They saw it as softening the Roman character, diverting resources from more manly pursuits like warfare and civic duty. This cultural tension meant that while silk was desired, it was also viewed with a degree of suspicion by some, especially those who clung to the old Roman ways. Historians still argue whether this moralistic outcry was genuine concern or simply a way for some traditionalists to criticize the changing face of Roman society. So, when Elagabalus arrived on the scene, clad head to toe in silk, he wasn't just wearing an expensive fabric. He was actively challenging deeply ingrained Roman social norms and moral sensibilities. He was taking a symbol of discreet, elite luxury and turning it into a brazen, everyday statement. He wasn't just breaking fashion rules, he was breaking cultural rules, inviting the very criticisms that traditionalists had been muttering about for decades. His reign, therefore, became a living, breathing, shimmering example of the clash between old Roman virtues and the allure of new, exotic extravagances. You can almost feel the gentle breeze of shifting cultural winds, carrying you deeper into a peaceful slumber. Behind many an eccentric emperor, there's often a powerful woman, and Elagabalus was no exception in his case. It was his formidable grandmother, Julia Maesa, and his equally influential mother, Julia Soaemias. These two women were the true architects of his ascent to power, and they remained central figures throughout his tumultuous reign, often attempting to steer his wild impulses, or at least trying to manage the fallout. Imagine Julia Soaemias, his mother, a woman of significant intelligence and ambition, always close by, whispering advice, perhaps even directing some of his more controversial actions. She was a priestess of Elagabal herself, deeply devoted to the cult of the sun god, and likely instrumental in fostering her son's religious zeal. It's easy to picture her, draped perhaps not in silk herself, but in equally rich traditional Roman finery, her eyes constantly scanning the court, assessing threats, and identifying opportunities. She held significant sway, more than many empresses before her, actively participating in imperial councils and even appearing on coins, a clear sign of her unusual influence. Then there's Julia Maesa, the matriarch, a woman of immense political savvy who had navigated the treacherous waters of Roman court life for decades. She was the one who conceived the plan to install Elagabalus on the throne, recognizing the power vacuum and seizing the moment. She understood the Roman army, the Roman people, and the intricacies of political manipulation, while Elagabalus was parading around in his silk gowns and performing his exotic rituals. It was often Massa who was attempting to manage the state, to keep the wheels of empire turning, and to mitigate the damage caused by her grandson's increasingly bizarre behavior. You can almost hear her sighing softly, perhaps a little exasperated, but always calculating, always strategizing. Their influence on Elagabalus's silk obsession is an interesting point. Did they encourage it, seeing it as a way to distinguish him, to emphasize his otherness and divine connection? Or did they despair over it, viewing it as yet another instance of his reckless disregard for Roman traditions? Historians still argue whether these powerful women were genuinely supportive of his religious reforms and lavish lifestyle, or if they merely tolerated them as a means to maintain their own power and influence. It's plausible that they, too, were caught in the strange performance that was Elagabalus's court, trying to balance his excesses with the need to keep the empire from crumbling, regardless of their precise stance on his silken wardrobe. Their presence ensured that Elagabalus, despite his youth and often baffling decisions, was never truly alone at the helm. They provided a crucial, albeit often challenged, anchor in the storm of his reign. You can almost feel the weight of their expectations, the subtle pressure of their influence, a soothing, heavy blanket that settles you deeper into the quiet hum of history. Elagabalus's devotion to silk was merely one thread in a much larger tapestry of controversial practices that defined his reign. He wasn't just obsessed with luxurious fabrics, he was determined to revolutionize Roman religion and customs, often in ways that deeply offended the traditional Roman elite. His primary goal was to elevate his patron deity, the sun god Elagabal, to the supreme position within the Roman pantheon, even above Jupiter, the king of the gods. Imagine, if you will, the shockwaves through conservative Roman society when Elagabalus, the living embodiment of their traditional values, at least in theory, began parading the black, conical stone of Elagabal through the streets of Rome. This wasn't a subtle integration, it was a grand, often bizarre, spectacle. Accounts describe him personally leading the procession, sometimes even dancing in silk robes, surrounded by exotic priests from Syria, performing rituals that seemed utterly alien to Roman sensibilities. He even reportedly forced senators to participate, marching backward before the sacred stone, while he himself rode in a chariot drawn by white horses, often adorned with gold and, you guessed it, silk harnesses. It was a visual assault on everything Roman aristocracy held sacred, beyond the religious reforms. His personal life became a source of constant scandal. He was known for his numerous marriages, often to Vestal virgins, a sacrilege of the highest order, and for his rumored relationships with men, even attempting to take on a female role himself. These acts were not only seen as morally depraved by many Romans, but also as a direct challenge to the very fabric of Roman masculinity and social order. His lavish banquets, where exotic foods were served on gold platters and guests reclined on silk cushions, became infamous for their extravagance and perceived debauchery. Some accounts, likely exaggerated by his enemies, even claim he would release wild animals among his dinner guests, or drown them in a shower of rose petals. He was, in many ways, the original party animal, but with an imperial budget and a disturbing disregard for public opinion. His obsession with silk wasn't just about comfort or personal preference, it was interwoven with his religious and social provocations. The exotic fabric, so alien to traditional Roman attire, became a visual manifestation of his radical departure from established norms. When he wore silk, he wasn't just being flamboyant, he was making a statement about his divine right to rule, his connection to an Eastern deity, and his absolute disdain for the dusty traditions of old Rome. Historians still argue whether his acts were the genuine religious zeal of a young man, or a calculated attempt to break down existing power structures and consolidate his own unique form of imperial authority. Either way, his reign was a continuous series of gentle provocations, each one a soft, silken whisper of rebellion against the rigid expectations of the Roman world, lulling you deeper into a contented quiet. As you can imagine, Elagabalus's increasingly bizarre behavior and his unapologetic embrace of all things non-Roman did not go over well with the traditional Roman elite. Imagine being a stern, conservative senator, proud of your heritage, your family's long history of service, and your adherence to the old Roman virtues. Then, suddenly, a teenage emperor appears, not only wearing scandalous amounts of silk, but also trying to replace Jupiter with a foreign sun god and marrying Vestal virgins. It was, to them, an affront of the highest order, a grotesque parody of imperial rule. The public perception of Elagabalus quickly deteriorated. While some Romans might have initially been amused or even impressed by his extravagance, his constant provocations and religious innovations soon alienated almost everyone. The very things that made him unique, his silk, his Eastern rituals, his unconventional personal life, became the fodder for gossip, outrage, and ultimately sedition. Roman historians, many of whom wrote after his death and were clearly hostile to his memory, painted a picture of a depraved, effeminate tyrant, completely unfit to rule. While we should always take these ancient accounts with a grain of salt, the sheer volume and consistency of the negative portrayals suggest that public opinion, particularly among the influential classes, was decidedly against him. His open embrace of silk, in particular, was seen as a symbol of his oriental corruption and his rejection of Roman masculinity. In their eyes, strong Roman men wore sturdy wool and linen, not delicate, shimmering silk. This fabric, once a quiet sign of immense wealth, became a lightning rod for criticism, a tangible representation of everything that was deemed wrong with his reign. It contributed to the narrative that he was soft, weak, and unsuited to lead a formidable empire. Imagine the murmurs in the forum, the whispers in the senatorial chambers, all centered around the latest outlandish outfit Elagabalus had paraded. Did you see him in that sheer silk tunic, the nerve? You can almost hear the indignation, a gentle rumble that drifts into the background. This alienation wasn't just confined to the stuffy old senators. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite bodyguards, who were often kingmakers in this tumultuous period, grew increasingly disillusioned. They valued stability, military prowess, and a leader who commanded respect, not one who was seen as an unstable, flamboyant priest-king. His lavish spending, much of it on luxuries like silk, also drained the imperial treasury, further exacerbating discontent among those who relied on the emperor's financial stability. Historians still argue whether the outrage was truly about morality and tradition, or simply a convenient excuse to remove a politically inconvenient ruler. Regardless, his silken extravagances and religious zealotry were precisely the things that alienated the very people whose support he desperately needed to survive. The stage was set, and Elagabalus, draped in his finest silk, was unknowingly heading towards a dramatic and rather abrupt exit. Now, let's pull back the silken curtains and peek into the rather peculiar daily life within Elagabalus's imperial court. If you were a member of his inner circle, life would have been a strange blend of immense luxury, constant performance, and perhaps a good deal of nervous apprehension. Every day seemed to be a new spectacle, an opportunity for the young emperor to defy expectations and indulge his every whim. Imagine waking up in the imperial palace. The air might be thick with the scent of exotic incense, burning in ornate censers. You'd probably be surrounded by opulence, with rich tapestries adorning the walls and, of course, an abundance of silk everywhere. Not just in the emperor's private chambers, but perhaps in the dining halls, the audience rooms, even draped over statues. The very atmosphere would have been designed to impress and overwhelm, a constant reminder of the emperor's boundless wealth and his unconventional tastes. Meals in Elagabalus's court were legendary for their extravagance. Picture yourself at a banquet, reclining on a couch covered in shimmering silk, while servants bring forth dishes so elaborate they border on the absurd. There are stories of him serving peas with gold dust, or exotic birds that had been flown in from distant lands just for a single meal. The sheer wastefulness was part of the point, a demonstration of his utter disdain for ordinary economic concerns, and the entertainment that often included dancers in flowing silk costumes, musicians playing unusual instruments, and perhaps even gladiatorial contests held within the palace grounds. Just for the emperor's amusement, you'd need to have a strong stomach and an even stronger sense of humor to navigate these events. Beyond the banquets, daily routines were often dictated by Elagabalus's religious practices. His days often revolved around elaborate rituals dedicated to the sun god Elagabal. This might involve morning processions to the temple, sacrifices of exotic animals, though perhaps less gory than you'd imagine. As the aim was often spectacle, and chanting, these religious duties were woven into the fabric of imperial life, making the court feel more like a grand temple than a center of political power. Imagine attending a morning meeting about state affairs, only for it to be interrupted by a sudden, flamboyant religious ceremony. It certainly would have kept things interesting. Even the simple act of bathing was transformed into a luxurious ritual. Public baths were a cornerstone of Roman life, but Elagabalus reportedly had his own private baths outfitted with gold and silver fixtures. And, you guessed it, often adorned with silk towels and drapes. Historians still argue whether some of the more extreme stories about his daily life were true, or simply the exaggerations of his enemies trying to blacken his name. But what is clear is that life under Elagabalus was anything but boring. It was a kaleidoscope of color, scent, and spectacle, often with silk at its very heart, all designed to gently carry you into the realm of pleasant dreams, while we've been basking in the silken glow of Elagabalus's Rome. Let's take a quick, gentle detour to the very source of this luxurious fabric, the distant East. Understanding how silk was actually made adds another layer of appreciation for its incredible value and the centuries of guarded secrets surrounding its production. Imagine, far across vast continents, in ancient China, the delicate, almost silent process of sericulture unfolding. It all begins, quite literally, with a worm, the silkworm, Bombyx mori. These aren't just any caterpillars, they are specialized creatures, entirely dependent on humans for their survival, a testament to thousands of years of careful cultivation. Their diet: exclusively mulberry leaves. Picture rows and rows of mulberry trees, their leaves carefully harvested to feed these voracious little eaters. It's a remarkably labor-intensive process, demanding constant attention and a precise environment. The magic truly begins when the silkworms reach maturity and start to spin their cocoons. Each worm meticulously produces a single, continuous strand of raw silk, sometimes up to a mile long, winding it around itself to form a protective oval casing. It's a marvel of natural engineering, a tiny, self-made sleeping bag that would eventually become the most prized fabric in the world. Once the cocoons are complete, they are carefully collected to harvest the long, unbroken thread. The cocoons are typically immersed in hot water, which softens the sericin, the gummy substance that holds the silk fibers together, and kills the silkworm inside. This is a crucial step, as allowing the moth to emerge would break the precious filament. Then comes the painstaking process of reeling. Each individual strand from several cocoons is gently unwound and combined to create a single, stronger thread. This raw silk thread is then twisted together to form yarn, which can then be dyed and woven into the magnificent fabrics that Elagabalus so adored. The entire process, from feeding the worms to weaving the cloth, required immense skill, patience, and a deep understanding of the delicate balance of nature. For centuries, the Chinese fiercely guarded the secrets of sericulture. It was an imperial monopoly, punishable by death if the knowledge, or even silkworm eggs, left the country. This secrecy was a key factor in silk's incredible value and its mystique in the Western world. Imagine the frustration of the Romans, who admired and coveted this shimmering fabric, but had no idea how it was made, contributing to the rumors that silk grew on trees. Historians still argue whether the secret was eventually smuggled out piece by piece, or if a single, dramatic act of espionage finally broke the monopoly. Regardless, this millennia-old industry, carried out with such care and precision, was the silent, distant engine behind Elagabalus's sartorial splendor, a testament to the quiet wonders of history, gently easing you into slumber. Alas, even the most extravagant of emperors, particularly one as unconventional as Elagabalus, cannot reign indefinitely, especially when alienating virtually everyone around him. His brief, chaotic, and silk-drenched rule came to a rather abrupt and violent end, a fate that, sadly, was not uncommon for Roman emperors. The seeds of his downfall were sown early, nurtured by his increasingly bizarre behavior and the deep resentment of the Roman establishment. His religious reforms, his scandalous marriages, his open embrace of luxury and perceived decadence, all contributed to a growing chorus of discontent. The final straw, perhaps, was his increasing disregard for his cousin, Severus Alexander, who had been adopted by his grandmother, Julia Maesa, as a more palatable heir to the throne. Maesa and Soemius, seeing Elagabalus spiraling out of control and jeopardizing their family's power, began to shift their support to the younger, more conventional Alexander. Imagine the tension in the palace, a thick, palpable unease that even the rustle of silk couldn't mask. The Praetorian Guard, weary of Elagabalus's antics and perhaps swayed by the promises of the savvy Julia Maesa, grew increasingly restless. They were the emperor's bodyguards, but also, often, his executioners. In March of 292 AD, a mere 4 years into his reign, the inevitable happened. The Praetorian Guard, fed up with his bizarre pronouncements and lavish lifestyle, mutinied. Elagabalus, along with his mother Julia Soemias, attempted to flee or appeal to the soldiers. But it was too late. Accounts, though undoubtedly embellished by hostile sources, describe him being dragged from the palace, perhaps still clad in some extravagant silk garment, and brutally murdered. His body, along with his mother's, was then subjected to further indignities, dragged through the streets of Rome, and eventually thrown into the Tiber River. It was a humiliating and violent end for an emperor who had so defiantly flaunted his power and luxury. The Damnatio Memoriae followed swiftly, a Roman decree to erase his memory from public record. His statues were pulled down, his name chiseled off inscriptions, and his legacy officially condemned. Historians still argue whether his assassination was a direct result of his personal behavior and religious fanaticism, or if it was a calculated political coup orchestrated by his grandmother to secure the Severan dynasty's future through the more acceptable Severus Alexander. Regardless, his death marked a sharp turn back towards more traditional Roman imperial rule. At least for a time, the shimmering, controversial era of the Silk Emperor was over, replaced by the quiet, predictable hum of conventional authority. You can almost feel the gentle shift in the ancient world's political winds, a soft breeze that carries you deeper into a peaceful slumber. Despite the brutal attempt to erase his memory through Damnatio Memoriae, Elagabalus's reign, however brief and scandalous, left a peculiar and undeniable mark on Roman history. He's often remembered as one of Rome's most eccentric and controversial emperors, a footnote in the grand narrative. Perhaps, but a very brightly colored, silk-embroidered footnote at that. His legacy isn't one of great military victories or monumental reforms, but rather of a unique, almost performance art approach to emperorship, his most enduring legacy. For our purposes tonight, is undoubtedly his association with silk. Even centuries after his death, his name would likely conjure images of extravagant luxury and an almost unbelievable devotion to this single fabric. He single-handedly amplified silk's status in Rome, pushing its use beyond mere adornment into the realm of imperial costume and personal statement. While he might have alienated the traditionalists, he certainly solidified silk's reputation as the ultimate symbol of opulence. It became the fabric of emperors, whether they loved it or merely tolerated it for its undeniable prestige. Beyond the silk, Elagabalus's reign highlighted the ongoing tension between traditional Roman values and the increasing influence of Eastern cultures and religions. He was a product of his Syrian upbringing and his attempt to integrate, or perhaps impose, his native sun god cult onto the Roman pantheon was a stark illustration of this cultural clash. While his efforts ultimately failed, they foreshadowed later religious shifts within the Roman Empire, including the eventual rise of Christianity. He was, in a way, ahead of his time in his globalist leanings, though perhaps a little too enthusiastic in his execution. His story also provides a fascinating glimpse into the power dynamics within the imperial court, particularly the surprising influence of formidable women like Julia Maesa and Julia Somius, their ability to place him on the throne, and then to orchestrate his removal, demonstrates that imperial power in Rome was rarely absolute. Even for an emperor, it was a complex web of military loyalty, political maneuvering, and familial ambition, all played out against a backdrop of constantly shifting public opinion. Historians still argue whether his reign was a genuine attempt at religious reform or simply the unbridled indulgence of a powerful youth, manipulated by those around him. Elagabalus's legacy is, therefore, a mix of infamy, historical curiosity, and a surprisingly colorful contribution to the history of fashion. He might have been condemned by his contemporaries, but his bizarre story continues to fascinate, a testament to the fact that even the most seemingly boring corners of history can hold the most unexpected characters. And now, as we gently turn the page on his extraordinary life, you can almost hear the soft rustle of silk fading into the distance, guiding you deeper into the quietude of dreams. After Elagabalus's dramatic exit from the imperial stage, the Roman world, with a collective sigh of relief, attempted to re-establish a sense of order and tradition. His successor, Severus Alexander, under the careful guidance of Julia Maesa, represented a return to more conventional Roman values. This shift naturally impacted fashion and, by extension, the use of silk within the empire. While silk didn't disappear entirely, its flamboyant, ubiquitous presence in the imperial court certainly did. Severus Alexander, keen to distance himself from his predecessor's excesses, adopted a more restrained and dignified imperial style. You wouldn't find him parading around in sheer silk tunics or draping entire rooms in the costly fabric. Instead, silk likely reverted to its pre-Elagabalus status, a symbol of extreme wealth. Used sparingly and with a certain amount of decorum, it was still coveted, still imported, but its use was no longer a provocative statement. It was simply a subtle affirmation of status among the very elite, the long trade routes of the Silk Road. However, continued to function. The Roman appetite for exotic goods, including spices, precious stones, and fine fabrics, remained strong. The flow of silk from the east might have occasionally been disrupted by political turmoil in distant lands, but the underlying demand ensured its continued, if sometimes intermittent, arrival in the Mediterranean. As the centuries passed, the Roman Empire, and later its eastern successor, the Byzantine Empire, would become increasingly adept at working with silk. They even eventually managed to acquire the secrets of sericulture themselves. Though this was many years after Elagabalus's time, imagine the relief of no longer relying on a perilous, 1,000-mile journey for every single thread. This eventual acquisition of silk production knowledge drastically altered its availability and cost within the Roman sphere of influence. While it remained a luxurious item, it became more accessible to a wider segment of the wealthy population. This development, however, was a long way off in Elagabalus's immediate aftermath. For now, the prevailing sentiment was a rejection of his extravagance and a desire for stability. The very fabric of Roman society, it seemed, was attempting to shed the silken excesses of one emperor for the more sober woolen garments of tradition. Historians still argue whether this shift was a genuine moral recalibration or simply a practical necessity to stabilize the empire after Elagabalus's reign of terror. Either way, the gentle rustle of silk became less a roar and more a whisper in the ears of the Roman elite, a calming reminder of order restored, lulling you into deep, peaceful sleep. So, we arrive at the very end of our gently told tale, leaving the controversies of imperial Rome behind and focusing on the enduring allure of silk itself. From the humble silkworm munching on mulberry leaves in distant China, to the shimmering robes of Emperor Elagabalus, and then to the more discreet uses in later Roman society. Silk has always held a unique place in human history. It's more than just a fabric, it's a testament to human ingenuity, global connection, and our timeless fascination with beauty and luxury. Think about it, the journey silk made, silently crossing continents for thousands of years, carrying with it not just economic value but also whispers of distant cultures, exotic tastes, and profound mysteries. It connected worlds that otherwise had little direct contact, fostering a complex web of trade, ideas, and even, eventually, technological transfer. The story of silk is, in many ways, the story of early globalization. Long before the term was even conceived, it reminds us that humanity has always sought to connect, to acquire, and to adorn itself with the finest things the world has to offer, no matter how far they must travel. Even today, in our modern world of synthetic fibers and mass production, silk retains a certain magic. You can feel it, can't you? The smooth, cool touch against your skin, the way it drapes and shimmers, the subtle rustle it makes as it moves. It's a sensory experience unlike any other, a whisper of ancient luxury that transcends time. Perhaps it's the thousands of years of guarded secrecy surrounding its creation, or the sheer artistry involved in transforming a tiny worm's cocoon into such a magnificent material. Whatever the reason, silk continues to captivate us, a gentle reminder of history's enduring elegance. As the echoes of Roman feasts and silken processions begin to fade, let the quiet hum of history lull you into a state of deep relaxation. The stories we've shared, from the eccentric emperor to the patient silkworm, are now just soft whispers in the vast tapestry of time. You've journeyed through ancient empires, felt the imagined touch of luxurious fabrics, and explored the gentle quirks of the past. All that's left is to let these thoughts drift away, like silk floating on a gentle breeze. The day is winding down, the world outside growing quiet. Your mind is calm, your body relaxed. Allow the soft murmur of these historical tales to become a comforting presence, like a favorite blanket pulling you into stillness. There's nothing left to do now but to breathe, to simply be, and to let the peacefulness of this moment embrace you fully. Each breath in, a gentle sigh of contentment. Each breath out, a release of any lingering thought. The historical tapestry of silk and emperors has been woven. And now, it's time for you to drift into a deep, restorative sleep. Sweet dreams.